She wore civilian clothes, served coffee, and stayed invisible for 10 days. Colonel Harrison felt comfortable making dismissive comments about her capabilities right in front of her. He had no idea he was insulting a Pentagon general who could end his career with a single phone call. What happened next would become the most talked about incident in Fort Carson's history. A single phone call that transformed a quiet coffee server into someone who could reshape military policy with a word. Colonel Harrison's comfortable assumptions were about to collide with a reality so shocking that it would end careers, change protocols, and remind everyone that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one everyone ignores. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching today? And if stories like this move you, please consider subscribing. Brigadier General Amanda Thompson stood at the window of her Pentagon office watching the morning traffic flow along the Potomac. At 43, she had spent the last 18 months in strategic planning, making decisions that affected thousands of soldiers across multiple theaters of operation. Yet she felt increasingly disconnected from the very people whose lives hung in the balance of her recommendations. The problem had been nagging at her for weeks. Policy papers crossed her desk daily, filled with statistics and assessments about troop morale, operational effectiveness, and unit cohesion. But numbers on spreadsheets told only part of the story. She needed to understand what was really happening at ground level, away from the sanitized reports that filtered up through the chain of command. Her mentor, retired Lieutenant General Margaret Davis, had once told her that effective leadership required understanding the human element behind every strategic decision. Davis had served in combat zones where the gap between policy and reality could mean the difference between life and death. She had emphasized that commanders who lost touch with their soldiers' daily experiences inevitably made flawed decisions, no matter how sound their theoretical knowledge might be. Amanda made a decision that would have shocked her Pentagon colleagues. She would use her accumulated leave time to work undercover at various military installations, observing unfiltered military life from the bottom up. Not as an inspector or investigator, but as someone trying to reconnect with the fundamental human dynamics that shaped military effectiveness. Her first assignment would be Fort Carson, Colorado, where she would work in the enlisted club as civilian catering staff. The large installation housed multiple units and provided a diverse cross-section of military personnel. More importantly, it was far enough from Washington that recognition would be unlikely. Chapter 2. Preparation. Amanda spent considerable time preparing for her undercover assignment. She studied the civilian personnel files for Fort Carson service operations, learning the typical background profiles and employment patterns. She arranged for temporary civilian identification under her maiden name, Amanda Williams, and developed a plausible cover story about seeking temporary work between jobs. The physical transformation required careful attention to detail. She altered her usual hairstyle, choosing a more practical cut that would blend with working-class expectations. Her wardrobe shifted from tailored military uniforms and professional business attire to simple, functional clothing appropriate for food service work. She practiced speaking in a more casual manner, avoiding the precise military terminology and formal speech patterns that had become second nature over 2 decades of service. Most importantly, she arranged for a secure communication system that would allow her to handle any genuine emergencies without compromising her cover. Her chief of staff, Colonel Stephen Martinez, would serve as her primary contact, with strict instructions to reach her only in cases of true crisis that required her immediate attention. Chapter 3. Integration. Amanda's first day at Fort Carson went smoothly. The enlisted club manager, a retired sergeant named Frank Johnson, welcomed her with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing temporary staff. He explained her duties: food preparation, table service, and general maintenance of the dining areas used by enlisted personnel and junior officers. The work was physically demanding but straightforward. Amanda found herself assigned primarily to beverage service, moving between tables with coffee, soft drinks, and water. The position provided excellent opportunities for observation, as she could listen to conversations while remaining essentially invisible to the customers. Within her first week, Amanda began to understand the complex social dynamics that shape daily military life. She observed how junior enlisted personnel interacted with NCOs, how different units maintained their distinct cultures, and how official policies translated into actual practice. Some of her findings confirmed her Pentagon-level understanding, while others revealed gaps between policy intent and ground-level reality. The soldiers she served were generally professional and respectful, though she noticed clear hierarchical patterns in how they treated civilian staff. Most interactions were courteous but brief, with little personal engagement beyond the immediate service transaction. This social distance seemed to reflect broader military training about maintaining appropriate boundaries between military and civilian personnel. Chapter 4. The Colonel. On her 8th day, Amanda encountered Colonel Kevin Harrison, a battalion commander who would fundamentally challenge her understanding of military leadership effectiveness. Harrison was 47 years old, with a career built on administrative competence and political acumen rather than combat experience. His assignment at Fort Carson represented a prestigious position that typically led to promotion to general officer rank. Harrison possessed the kind of polish that impressed senior officers during formal evaluations. His uniforms were impeccable, his paperwork was flawless, and his briefings were professionally delivered. He had successfully navigated the complex political landscape of military advancement, maintaining favorable relationships with influential superiors, while avoiding controversial assignments that might damage his career trajectory. However, Amanda quickly recognized problematic patterns in Harrison's leadership style. His interactions with different categories of personnel revealed a character that was far less impressive than his professional reputation suggested. With senior officers, he demonstrated appropriate deference and well-informed commentary. With peers, he displayed strategic collegiality and mutual support. With subordinates, he projected confident leadership and mentoring capability. But with enlisted personnel, civilian staff, and anyone he perceived as outside his immediate sphere of professional concern, Harrison revealed troubling attitudes that contradicted the Army's stated values of respect for all personnel. He spoke to civilian workers with barely concealed condescension, dismissed suggestions from experienced NCOs without consideration, and generally treated support staff as if they were invisible, except when their services were specifically required. Chapter 5. The Conversation. The incident that would expose Harrison's true character occurred during the morning coffee service on Amanda's 10th day at Fort Carson. She was refilling coffee cups at a table where Harrison was conducting an informal meeting with 3 other officers: Major Timothy Lee, Captain Jennifer Miller, and Lieutenant Colonel Gregory Adams. The conversation began with routine discussion of training schedules and personnel assignments. Amanda moved quietly between tables, maintaining the professional invisibility that civilian staff were expected to demonstrate in military settings. She had learned to work efficiently while remaining alert to conversations that might provide insights into leadership dynamics and policy implementation. Harrison's voice gradually rose above normal conversational levels as he began expressing opinions about current military policies regarding diversity and inclusion. He argued that recent initiatives were compromising military effectiveness by prioritizing social objectives over traditional measures of combat readiness. His tone carried the confidence of someone who believed his audience shared his perspectives. Major Lee shifted uncomfortably in his chair before suggesting that diverse perspectives might actually enhance decision-making in complex operational environments. Harrison dismissed this viewpoint with a wave of his hand, characterizing it as politically motivated thinking that ignored practical military realities. The conversation took a more troubling turn when Harrison began making specific comments about women and minority personnel. He suggested that recent promotions in these categories reflected political pressures rather than genuine merit, and that the military was being forced to lower standards to accommodate demographic goals. His remarks revealed deep-seated prejudices that he apparently felt comfortable expressing in what he considered a safe environment. Captain Miller mentioned several examples of outstanding performance by female officers, including specific combat leadership achievements. Harrison quickly categorized these as exceptional cases that proved the rule rather than challenged it. He argued that isolated examples of success did not justify broader policy changes that he believed would ultimately weaken military effectiveness. Chapter 6: The Escalation. Lieutenant Colonel Adams suggested that the conversation might be inappropriate for a public setting, noting the presence of civilian staff and other personnel within earshot. Harrison rejected this concern, arguing that his comments were simply realistic assessments that any experienced officer would recognize as accurate. He then made a statement that would prove to be his undoing. Gesturing toward Amanda as she refilled coffee cups at nearby tables, Harrison used her as an example of what he considered appropriate role assignment based on capabilities. He suggested that her current position in food service accurately reflected her qualifications and potential contributions to the military community. Harrison's analysis continued with broader observations about the importance of recognizing realistic limitations rather than entertaining unrealistic expectations about hidden potential. He characterized this as practical leadership wisdom that junior officers needed to understand to be effective in their own command responsibilities. The other officers at the table appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Major Lee attempted to redirect the discussion toward more professional topics, while Captain Miller glanced nervously toward Amanda to assess whether she had overheard the disparaging comments. Harrison interpreted their discomfort as evidence of insufficient leadership experience rather than legitimate concern about his inappropriate behavior. He began to elaborate on his theories about effective personnel assessment, using Amanda's presence as a convenient teaching opportunity about the importance of accurate capability evaluation. Chapter 7: The Call. At precisely 10:47 hours, Amanda's secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated an emergency communication from the Pentagon. The caller identification showed only DOD urgent, the protocol established for crisis situations requiring immediate attention from senior commanders. Amanda glanced at the phone display and immediately recognized the significance of the call. Her staff had explicit instructions to contact her only in cases of genuine emergency that could not be handled through normal channels. The timing suggested that a developing situation required her immediate strategic assessment. Harrison noticed the phone and immediately directed Amanda to either ignore the call or take it outside the dining area. He characterized personal phone calls during work hours as unprofessional behavior that civilian staff needed to understand was unacceptable in military environments. Amanda apologized quietly and moved toward the phone, but Harrison's voice became more authoritative. He ordered her to put the phone away entirely, explaining that her job was to serve coffee and maintain the facility, not to conduct personal business during work hours. The phone stopped ringing briefly, then immediately began again. The repetition of the emergency signal indicated that the situation was escalating and required urgent attention. Amanda looked at Harrison's expectant expression, then at the uncomfortable faces of the other officers, and made a decision that would change everything. Chapter 8. The Revelation. Amanda answered the phone with the calm authority that had characterized her military career. Her voice carried none of the deferential tone she had maintained during her civilian assignment as she responded to her chief of staff's briefing. Colonel Martinez was calling about a rapidly developing situation in the Middle East, where satellite intelligence had detected unusual troop movements that suggested preparation for significant military action. The Joint Chiefs were convening an emergency session to assess the threat level and recommend appropriate response measures. Amanda's strategic analysis was required before any decisions could be made. The silence that followed Amanda's professional response was complete and immediate. Harrison's mouth fell open as he processed the impossibility of what he was hearing. The other officers sat frozen, apparently unable to reconcile the civilian food service worker they had been observing with the senior military commander who was now participating in high-level strategic planning. For the next 20 minutes, Amanda functioned as exactly what she had always been, one of the most influential military leaders in the United States. Her questions were precise and strategically focused, cutting directly to the implications of the intelligence being presented. Her analysis was comprehensive and swift, drawing connections between current events and broader geopolitical patterns that reflected years of experience in strategic planning. She recommended specific response measures that demonstrated intimate knowledge of military capabilities, diplomatic considerations, and operational constraints. Her suggestions included coordination with allied forces, adjustment of existing deployment patterns, and preparation of contingency plans that could be implemented rapidly if the situation deteriorated. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. When Amanda concluded the call, she turned to face the 4 officers who had been involuntarily witnesses to her transformation. Harrison appeared to be having difficulty breathing normally, while the other officers stared with expressions of fascination and growing understanding. Amanda identified herself as Brigadier General Amanda Thompson, Pentagon Strategic Planning Division, and explained that she had been conducting a personal observation assignment to better understand ground-level military dynamics. She apologized for any deception, while emphasizing that her presence had been intended to observe normal operations without the artificial behavior that her uniformed presence would have created. Harrison finally managed to speak, asking in a whisper whether she was actually a general officer. Amanda confirmed her rank and explained her direct reporting relationship to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She gestured toward the phone she had just used, noting that the call had involved a genuine crisis requiring immediate strategic assessment with potential implications for regional security and global stability. The revelation spread through Fort Carson with characteristic military efficiency. By evening, everyone on the installation had heard some version of the story about the general who had been working undercover in the enlisted club. The incident became a defining moment that would influence military leadership training for years to come. Chapter 10. Consequences and Lessons. Colonel Harrison submitted a formal letter of apology acknowledging his inappropriate behavior and the problematic assumptions that had guided his comments. However, the damage to his professional reputation was irreversible. Within 6 months, he found himself transferred to a logistics position that effectively ended his advancement potential. The incident prompted comprehensive review of leadership practices at Fort Carson and became a case study used throughout the military education system. The focus was not on the embarrassment of failing to recognize a senior officer, but on the fundamental importance of treating all personnel with dignity and respect, regardless of their apparent role or status. Amanda's experience provided valuable insights that extended far beyond her original observation objectives. Her direct exposure to unfiltered military culture had revealed both strengths and weaknesses in current leadership practices. More importantly, it had demonstrated the necessity of maintaining authentic connections between senior leaders and the personnel they commanded. The undercover assignment became the first in a series of similar experiences that would fundamentally shape Amanda's approach to military leadership. Each subsequent assignment provided new perspectives on the human dynamics that determined military effectiveness, reminding her that strategic success ultimately depended on the daily interactions between real people facing real challenges. The phone call that had ended her cover had been unexpected, but it had served a purpose beyond crisis management. It had created a moment when assumptions were challenged, prejudices were exposed, and the true nature of leadership was revealed for everyone to see. Sometimes the most important lessons emerged from the most ordinary circumstances, and sometimes the person serving coffee was exactly the person everyone else needed to listen to most carefully. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most ordinary moments, and sometimes the person you dismiss without a second thought is exactly the person who holds the key to everything you need to understand. Colonel Harrison learned this the hard way when his assumptions met reality in the most humiliating way possible. The next time you see someone serving coffee, cleaning tables, or working quietly in the background, remember Amanda's story. You never know who's really listening, who's really watching, and who might be taking notes on your character when you think nobody important is around. If stories like this remind you to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with respect, hit that subscribe button and join our community of viewers who believe that true strength often hides in plain sight. Drop a comment below. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their appearance or job? We'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, remember that the most important conversations often happen when people think no one significant is listening.